Hi everybody, and welcome to the Quality in Action webinar for April 2010. I know we have quite a few people signed up. You can view the attendees, and I'm sure we'll have people hopping on here right as we get started. All right. This month for the Quality in Action, we are taking one more month to really look at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota's Quality Mentoring Assessment Path tool. So along with some test pilots, we'll be looking at the tool and taking more of a demo and a test ride for folks to be able to really check it out and see what this new tool is all about. This is our itinerary for today, just some introductory things about who you're going to hear talking, what we're going to cover. Then we're just going to nail some of these questions about what the heck is the QMAP, if you're still wondering about that. I know some of the participants and the attendees on the webinar have already participated in the pilot or in one variation of the pilot, so you might be more familiar with it than others. This question of does it hurt? Hearing from folks who have completed the QMAP and finding out what is that experience like, what has it done for you, and to be able to focus in on some of those questions. And a little bit of thought to what happens after the QMAP is submitted. So once you've completed this self-assessment, then what? And then finally, just some updates on our upcoming webinars to continue the Quality in Action series. I'm April Reardon. I'm the Director of Training and Community Partnerships here at the Mentoring Partnership of Minnesota. This is actually a pretty old picture of Will, my baby, so I'll have to update for the next one. But that's me, and we've got others along with us. Here's Lindsay Carlson. She is our Promise Fellow here at the Mentoring Partnership, and she is handling a lot of the logistical items that go along with the webinar. So we do have several attendees, but I think we'll continue to leave people muted. You can raise your hand and Lindsay will unmute you so you can ask questions. Would love for it to be just interactive and be able to chat with us. The other option too is that you can type questions and submit those to us, and Lindsay will be responding directly to you, or like it says, if applicable, she'll just read it aloud to all of us so that we can share that. We know that some of you are participating by phone, some of you might have a microphone and speakers, or you might just be listening with others with you. So sometimes the attendee list doesn't necessarily reflect how many people are actually participating, because you could all be gathered around one computer and just listening. So that's where, sometimes that's where people end up typing the questions as well. Just a note too that when you are unmuted, please just monitor your background noise, because we all hear that. I'm not going to be relying too much on the PowerPoint. It's just something to note with the QMAP piece. I am going to pull up the QMAP itself and be able to show that tool, so we'll be kind of popping between screens. There's some other items from our website that I'll be showing as well. So that said, the slides that we do have here can be available upon request, but unlike some of the previous webinars, if you've participated, I didn't necessarily upload this to SlideShare, just because we're going to be moving around a little bit. But and as always, there's a PDF of the entire QMAP that's available on our website, and we can point that out when we go there. But anyway, if you want this PowerPoint, just you could shoot any of us an email and be happy to send it out to you. But just wanted to make a note that it's not necessarily available for an upload. All right, take a look at our test pilots again. These are two brave souls. We've got Becky Pilarczyk from Boulder Options and Linda Otto from Northfield Public Schools and the Connected Kids. These are two people who have been completing the QMAP and have been a part of the pilot and in the usability and the pilot phase, and have been so gracious and willing to share thoughts about their experience and to be able to share some of that with you. So it's nice to hear from somebody else who's actually been doing it from a program perspective, what that's like. And we have Becky, Polar Options would be a standalone program example, and with Linda we've got Connected Kids, which is embedded within the school system. So hi Becky and Linda.
Hello.
Thought we'd hear from you. We'll have to come back to their pictures when they're talking. I'll see if I can if I can manage that.
Because we love that so much.
Yeah. All right. So what the heck is the QMAP? This is how we've been describing it as the QMAP stands for Quality Mentoring Assessment Path. And it's a self-assessment tool. This is something specific for mentoring programs. I've heard from some programs that are embedded within a other youth organization that some of them, have done the YPQA or have done other quality assessments for their youth program, but have found that the QMAP is something that they're really looking forward to, or that they've found really helpful for really getting at the quality of their mentoring program. So whether it's their standalone mentoring programs, but and then for the programs that are, within the context of a larger youth-serving organization, that some of those other tools help to measure the quality of their overall youth services, but that this QMAP is really focused in on mentoring quality. So really designed to help improve current processes by evaluating program quality. What I thought I'd ask our test pilots is, how would you describe it? Or, if somebody asked you, what the heck is a QMAP, what would you say?
Well, I would say it's a tool for
and this is
helping.
Becky.
This is Becky. For helping agencies really assess where they're at on the mentoring continuum, because I think there's a variety of different mentoring programs, and now that funders are starting to get past the fad of funding mentoring programs and actually want to have some accountability and some results. So this is a really good tool to make sure that you're providing high quality services to your clients.
Linda, anything to add about how you would describe it?
Yeah, I would agree. I think it's a really good assessment tool. What I hope to use it to see where weaknesses in our program might be in terms of best practices and how to have the most effective program following best practices there is. And so it's a good tool for me to look at where we're at and then where we want to be.
Mm-hmm.
Great. So on that, just a little bit more. This is probably a review for some, but I know we have some people who are attending who are brand new to it. The way that we are looking at program quality with the QMAP is, this is based on the elements of effective practice for mentoring, which would be some national standards for mentoring that come from Mentor, the National Mentoring Partnership, and they consulted with, researchers and practitioners and mentoring partnerships and to come up with those elements of effective practice. We're also based on the current research on evidence-based practice and insight from program practitioners. So thinking about this elements of effective practice, here, that element standards are evidence-based, and they recently came out with a 3rd edition, which includes these benchmarks and standards that are evidence-based and supported by research-based justification. So, and that's really looking at the program operations pieces. So those program operations, and this is what we focused our last webinar on, was really looking at some of the those operations pieces and what are those standards and how do they compare to the QMAP. So I'm not going to go into that in too much detail, but just to note that those are research-based justifications for those standards. The elements of effective practice also includes some enhancements, which they say are based on the wisdom of outstanding practitioners and are offered for readers' consideration and use. So what I would note, kind of the difference here between the elements and the QMAP, is that, with no disrespect to research by any means, but that the QMAP, we're not necessarily assuming. The committee didn't want to assume that one form of evidence would be superior to another. You know, that the wisdom of outstanding practitioners, you know, and some of that experience, we wanted to look at that evidence kind of on the same level as research-based evidence. So, and looking at, as we learn more from the QMAP and we see how programs respond to the different items on the QMAP, that we'll start to learn even more about what quality mentoring is. That we'll learn from you or from the participants about new ideas or new ways to run a quality mentoring program. Hi, does that sound okay to our test pilots, Linda and Becky?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
Yep.
Alrighty. All right, so just so you know, we're in the pilot process. These were some of the pilot criteria. So, you know, when we're thinking about who may have already completed the program, because I'm going to show a little sample, and hearing from Linda and Becky, you know, there were some criteria for this process. I mean, it had to be a Minnesota program, open for at least 2 years. We wanted to make sure it was that somebody was ready to do this kind of assessment. It's not necessary. It's something that could be educational for a program that's just starting, but probably want to be, you know, in operation and actively matching. You know, if you're just starting and you haven't even recruited mentors or mentees yet, it's nice to be aware of where you're headed and what the QMAP might be asking you about as you design and build your program, but maybe you're not ready to, you know, necessarily assess your program. And the participating program, you know, we really wanted to make sure that we were still focused on adult with youth mentoring, and that that's just our focus. So those were the criteria. So pilots 1 and 2, pilots are underway and nearing completion. We have lots of submitted, completed QMAPs in the coffers, and more on their way. Just wanted to show who our QMAP pilot participants are, and this is where we go to the website. All right, we should be going to the website. Oh, there we are. Okay, good. If I can navigate here a second. So here we go. Looking to see what you're seeing. So here's our list of the pilot participants. Some of those may have changed. You know, so there are some who dropped out for various reasons. You know, but this was the range of programs who are participating in the pilot, and so not all are done yet. Some are still working on that, but if you want to look at that list, it's on our website. I know we have some attendees on the webinar who are also part of this pilot, so just want to acknowledge that you're here, and feel free to chime in at any point about your experience with the QMAP as well. Also just want to note that, you know, remind everyone that it is not a final product yet. You know, that's why I just wanted to emphasize that we are in the pilot phase. You know, we're going to talk a little bit about potential scores and ratings and things, but those really don't mean much yet until we gather and have, are able to look at. Yeah, sure. I'm sorry, what was that? Linda, I couldn't hear you. Okay. Hello? Okay. The QMAP, sorry, I wasn't sure what that was. I'm not sure if everybody heard that, but there are no scores or ratings yet, but we need to establish some benchmarks. So, you know, what is we don't know what a normal score would be. We don't know what those scores would mean yet, but that's something that we'll find out as we complete the pilot and have more and more programs participate in the QMAP. What we have found through the pilot is that there's some typos, there are other changes or usability issues that need to be worked on because it's an online tool. You know, some of the technology and things like that we're taking lots of notes, and you know, through all these pilots, then we'll gather that feedback and information and make it as usable and user-friendly as possible when we, sort of launch a completed project or completed product. For example, the word relevant we discovered recently is misspelled throughout the QMAP. And then there are some changes to there's an uploads section that we'll look at and talk about later that we are definitely making some changes to. Okay, so what I wanted to do in answering this question of, so when you do the QMAP, does it hurt? This kind of, it's good for you, it's like a shot and maybe a flu shot or some sort of preventive thing, but you're still a little nervous about the process of getting that in place. I'm going to show everyone, if you haven't seen already, we'll just log in and take a look at it. So if you were to come to the website, one of the things that has to happen before you get here is that you'd need to register your program. So down here where it says non-registrant, so if you get to this page and you don't have a registration ID or password, it means that you need to complete the program registration form, which is pretty painless. It comes to us, we look at that, and then you're able to get your ID and password to log in. If you're a registered program right now, though, I'm going to log in, and if you're a registered program right now, and you log in, here, let me just show you here. So everybody can see my login.
April,
yes.
just an FYI, our server went down, so I'm now on the phone.
Oh, well, all right. I'll just pose questions to you. All right, thanks, Linda. We'll work through it. All right. Well, we're just looking. I'm logging in and showing the QMAP now. So if you log in now and you're a registered program, you won't necessarily see this quality mentoring assessment path link to the left of your program registration. This is sort of my dummy registration because it's in the pilot phase and it's not available to everybody yet. So just know that you won't see that right now unless you're part of the pilot. But so I have that. And then it takes you to this. I don't know why it keeps pausing my screen sharing. Okay. Here we go. I don't know why it does this. All right, it doesn't want me to show this. Here it comes. Here it comes. Okay. There must be some sort of limit at how many windows I can have open or something. All right, so here's the quality mentoring assessment path. There's a privacy policy. We click next. And so we're in here. What I wanted to show, we'll just get into a different section other than program management. Let's go into, so if you see up here, we can go program operations or program evaluation. We'll go to program, how about operations? And one of the usability things that we want to add is the ability to go to each. So within program operations, there are several different sections. We'd like to be able to just do a drop down so you could go to those sections. Right now, the way it's set up, if we scroll down here, is that you just have to click next. So then we're at the recruiting mentees section. I want to get to screening. So screening potential mentors, here's another section of program operations. So a little bit of how this works, we can just pick one of these items. So let's go with K5, perform at least one criminal background check on potential mentors. So this would be a sample of some of the questions that you'd be looking at. So local, state, and or federal. And so then you'd have to answer some of these questions about, this isn't relevant to my program or organization. We're still planning this. This is completed or in regular practice. So we'll say for my dummy program that yes, we do at least one criminal background check. It doesn't ask us at all about what kind of background check or who that's from, but we know that it's completed and in practice. So if you select that, then you are given these 5 items to rate yourself on. Going from, and this is where I think people would say, participants would say, and those who've completed the QMAP, that this is the most challenging part, is that when you go in and you're trying to rate yourself on this 1 to 5 scale, that it's a pretty complex scale as designed. That there's a whole lot of description here, as you can see, about, so this 1 would be performed without intentionality or any awareness of best practices. Sort of, we do this, but we don't know why, or we're not aware of why. We don't have any documentation of it. It's something we do, but it's not really a written policy or practice. It's just something that we've got. There's also this piece about creates a negative perception of the agency or program. So what we wanted to know is like, yeah, we do this, but it's not helpful to us. We do this, but it's actually hurting us, or it takes so many resources that it's actually has a negative impact on our program. Reduces the effective use of our resources and capacity. Or this would also be where if something was not performed consistently or regularly, sort of we have this in place, but I'm not sure if everybody on staff is doing the same thing. We have this policy, but people are unclear about that, or we're not sure who's supposed to do it. So that's sort of where that's at. And where we see a little bit of confusion from people is that, you can click that it's in completed or in regular practice and kind of rate yourself in this 1 or 2 area. But oftentimes people will just opt for this, we are still planning this, or have made steps towards completing but have not completed or put into regular practice. So that's where some of the technical assistance and some of the contact with NPM staff helps programs really think about, well, yeah, we do have something in place. But maybe we want to rate ourselves here so that because we know that we have a lot of room for improvement. So you kind of go along this scale and the first couple sections you're probably really reading through the scales, and then at some point you kind of get familiar with them, is what I'm hearing from programs, is that you figure that out. One of the questions too about the scales is, do you have to meet the description entirely? So if you're performing without intentionality, there's no documentation, but you don't really think that this 3rd item applies, but the rest of them do, do you still give yourself a 1? And it's kind of a which one describes it the most? And that's why we have these 2 and 4 where it's somewhere in between the 3 and the 5, and we're not sure. Like, we've got a little bit of this and a little bit of that, but it's not completely one or the other. But again, this isn't done, and the scales might be something that we get feedback on and do a little tweaking to as well to make them easier. I think that the idea is that we didn't want it to be necessarily 1 is the worst and 5 is the best. We wanted it to be more sophisticated and detailed than that, because it's not a good or bad scoring. It's about where can you stand to improve, or where do you land on quality. Test pilots, Becky and Linda, any thought, what were your impressions of the scales, or thinking about how you rate yourself? We talked about this in the last webinar about the scales and how each of you kind of interpreted them a little bit differently, and wondering as you went back and completed more of the QMAP, how that might have impacted you.
Well, I think one of the challenges with the scales is just it is up to personal interpretation. And as you had stated before, I think a lot of people were rating themselves more conservatively than maybe they needed to, or just were more erring on the side of caution. We tended to give ourselves higher scores because a lot of the stuff we've been doing for the last 10 or 15 years. But it's something to consider, is that maybe you have 2 agencies on the same par that are going to wind up rating themselves differently, even if it might be, they're exactly the same quality. So yeah, it is something to consider. And I think just having some instruction on how to interpret it is the way to go.
Yeah, Linda?
And well, I would agree. And I've completed all of the scales, and I still struggle with, we really have the documentation and pretty much everything in place, but do we do it all the time the best we can do? And that answer is, of course not. There's always room for improvement. And so I think that's where I struggle the most, is the pieces are there, they are, they're pretty consistent, but we're not a big staff, and so things fall through the cracks occasionally, and how does that fit into my ranking of the program? Because we can't do everything right or we don't do everything right all the time.
Yeah, and
so that's where my struggle is.
Yeah, and I think what we'll gather more and more is some instruction on how to interpret, and when we get to what happens after you finish it, I think some of that, what happens afterwards, will shed some light on that, and will certainly help with thinking about how do we level the playing field, or level the field for how people rate themselves. So kind of what Becky was saying, if you had two similar programs and they're actually pretty comparable in quality, but they just rated themselves so differently, that maybe what happens next helps to regulate that a little bit. For the two of you, and for anybody else who's on the webinar who's actually completed the QMAP, just some questions about does it hurt? What was the process like? What was the experience like? I have a ton of questions about kind of, did you do it alone or have others help you? And some how long does it take to finish? And then if there are questions from the attendees as well about what that experience is like. If you have specific questions, let's just let's throw those out here at this point. But just in general, kind of that, was it painless? Was it a little painful? Was it, how would you describe the experience to others?
I have to be honest, it was a little daunting. When you look at the top of the screen on the QMAP and it shows that progress field.
Here, I'm going to show that, okay.
Yeah. And you feel like you just entered a bunch of questions and you only got 5% more done.
Yeah.
That can be a little challenging, but I mean, it's a good thing. It shows how thorough this QMAP is, because it really is just very comprehensive and trying to look at all aspects of programming. And so I think educating people that yes, you're gonna have to set aside an hour or two and take some time to really go through this, but that it's so worth it because it can help you find your strengths and weaknesses and how you can improve your program, much like Linda was saying. And so I just think that's the incentive, is to really have that comprehensive assessment of your agency and the services that you're providing. So. And I like now that there's a drop-down box, because I think that'll make being able to chunk it in sections will be really helpful.
Yeah.
Well, and I also think depends on, it can take a lot or a little time, depending upon how you want to use it yourself, in your own program. For me, I really try to put some thought into what I want to do the next 12 months. And so I really try to complete those boxes, and if I want to get through it faster, I go back and visit the boxes later and put things in. So then I get up to 80% and I feel better that I'm not at 50% anymore of my completion. So, but I think it just depends on how much thought you want to put into it. And for me, I'm going to use it as a strategic plan. The fill-in boxes, and so it's probably taking me longer than it might if I was just doing it as a survey.
I'm just showing that this is the box. That we have these boxes where you can fill in what actions are you interested in taking. And yeah, so there are areas where people have used this just as a comment section as well, kind of no matter how they rated themselves or kind of explaining the rating. And again, it's a self-assessment tool. You're really assessing your own program. And so this is where that kind of notes section about, well, this is, these are the actions I'm interested in taking. And I've heard from other programs too, Linda, that they're really using that to define, okay, what is it that we need to improve on in the next year? Or, you know, how do we apply this to our strategic planning process?
Well, and it also helps me when I go back and look at why did I answer it this way.
Yeah.
I answered it this way because this is what I want to do.
For both of you, did you do it, have you done it alone, or did you involve others in the process, or like you said, Becky, you know, to chunk it into different sections? You know, and one of my questions too is so either way, however you did it this time, if you did it again, would you change that? Would you do it with other people or not with other people?
I did it alone, and I would absolutely change that. Jan had mentioned that she did it with her staff, and I just think that's such a wonderful tool to be able to bring an organization together. So I would definitely bring in the staff together at a meeting to discuss it, to see where everybody's at with each individual question.
And I did some of it alone and then some of it with the one other staff that's in the office with me, and it really gave us a lot of conversation. We might both rate ourselves a little bit differently, and then we could talk about it and say, oh, well, maybe we really did have that, but we just weren't thinking of it in that way. So I think it helps to do it with somebody, but it also is going to lengthen the process.
Yeah, and I know some programs have really just printed out the questions and have gone about it that way, sort of on paper and pencil, face-to-face in a meeting, and then went back and did the online piece about filling those things in. You know, and one of the things that has come up more than once in feedback from programs is how to involve the, you know, organizational or program leadership. So if it's not, you know, an executive director or a member of the board who's participating in it, how do you get them involved? And even if, you know, one of the suggestions is maybe requiring that somebody from the leadership signs, you know, provides a signature, or there's some sort of, you know, that's something that's not in place right now, that when you submit, is there some place where you have to sign and say, you know, we attest that this is as, you know, as true as it can be, or this is accurate, or something like that. So another piece just to be able to get leadership involved, and that will come up more too in the what happens afterwards, and thinking about how some people have been using the tool. But how long did it take to finish, or to get close to finishing? Any idea?
Well, I put a lot of thought in it, and I did, like Linda, use the comment boxes. Even if I had rated ourselves something rather high, I would often kind of justify what we were doing to use it. So it took me probably about 1 to 2 hours, probably about 2 hours to do. And I didn't do it all at once. I did a piece and then I came back to it and went through it again. So I'd say about 2 hours. But again, it's as intricate as you want to make it. If you want to utilize those boxes and use it as a strategic plan and use it as a guiding document, or if you're taking it as a survey.
Right, and I would say for me, I would guess maybe 4 to 5 hours.
Wow.
But I'm not, well, and that's really hard to say because it's, you know, it fits into my regular day, and so it's you know, 20 minutes here and then stop, or a section here and then a section the next day. So it's really hard to tell. The other piece that goes along with that, though, is I would go back and look at, you know, the effective practices, the manual, and then make sure that we had the documentation and things like that. So to do the actual survey kind of piece is relatively easy and relatively quick. It's just the extra stuff that you decide to put into it.
Yeah, and there's, you know, so, you know, for example, I mean, I think, you know, Linda, you had said that you had used the elements of effective practice and had lots of policies and things in place, but then over time with new grants or with other pieces hadn't necessarily gone back to update or to think about
Right.
some of those things. And this is not about Linda's program, but just for example, if you look at this K1, established written policies for consistent screening processes, including criteria for accepting and rejecting, blah, blah. If you read that one and said, you know what, we have policies for our screening process, we know what everybody has to do, but I don't know if we actually have that written then as part of our, our program manual. I mean, as you're going through this, you could, look at the elements and put something together, so that might affect how long it takes you to complete it, because if there are items that aren't complete yet, but you know that you could quickly do that, it's this educational tool of, that's how some programs have been like, ooh, I should probably do that. Like, I've been meaning to do that, and now I'll do that, and now I can check this is completed or in regular practice because I learned about that. This was my trigger, and I went ahead and did that. Because
And I also have pieces in different places, and it's consolidating those pieces and then tweaking them depending upon the grant. But they're spread all over, and so now they're not going to be spread all over anymore.
I'm trying to find wait a second here. Well, because then also, if you're doing the QMAP, one of the things to see is that, all right, so I don't have that. I can go to my resources and go to K for screening and find all kinds of things that will help me. Now it's not showing it again. Nope. Okay. So here we go. There's that one. Here we go. I have to figure out how it lets me show other screens here. Okay, so then you can go and there's all sorts of resources that are available there that might help you to put any of those items into place. So tools that you can look at and ways to go about doing that. So that's a helpful piece, I would think. It's good to note that we have that there.
And I also used it to help me, the elements and what they suggested, to see if was I a 3, was I a 4, was I a 5, was I a 1 or 2. So it kind of helped me determine where my ratings were.
Right. All right. So we're back here. Other questions or, hearing about what the process of doing the QMAP is like? I mean, if there's anything else either of you want to share about highlights or anything you were surprised by or challenges, but questions from attendees too are welcome. If not, we'll go back here. Okay. All right, so we heard a little bit about the process. So it can be daunting, as Becky had said, and also, but just really helpful and a meaningful process. It's the time it takes to complete it is really going to vary. For the pilots, we gave everyone 6 weeks, though, based upon, like we said, it took a little while to think about what are the things I want to have in place, who do I want to have work on this with me. I'm not going to do it all in one chunk, and recognizing that you have a full workload, and so where does this kind of quality assessment fit in? So looking at what happens afterwards. So this is this is not a final product by any means, and this does not mean this is exactly how we will use the tool in order to come up with some kind of score. I think that's some of where the anxiety comes from doing a tool like this is like, oh, what's my score going to be? And what we've heard so far is that depending on how you interpret the scales, because it is a self-assessment, will impact what that score might be. Something that I am playing around with is just looking at those 3 items that that you can initially rate yourself as. So if we go back to this page, if I can get there. This activity is not, I'm going to get my spotlight. This activity is not relevant to my program or organization. That's where I was looking at that would just be a no score, and most likely, if we went with this scoring structure. So it's not a final deal. But at 0, it means we just sort of take it out of the tool altogether. It just wouldn't be part of your score if it's truly not relevant to your program or organization. There aren't very many items that I think are truly irrelevant, but again, the pilot is a learning process and we wanted to include that just in case. We're still planning this or have made steps towards completing, but have not completed or put into regular practice. That would be what I've done is played around with giving that one a 1. And then if it is completed or in practice, that would be 2 points. And then I gotta get my pointer back. If we change that answer and went to this is completed, then it would be 2 plus wherever you scored yourself here, so that a total of 7 points possible for each item. So that's just, trying that out to see with a sample program, with a sample, oops, you don't need to see that, with a sample submission, what would a score look like? What would that be? One of the things that came up is, thinking about as you interpret the scales, one of the questions was, could you do it any better? If not, go ahead and give yourself a 5. If you've got it in practice and you don't really see any room for improvement, go ahead and give yourself a 5. I mean, I think there was a lot of hesitancy from programs to do the 5. Yeah, and I don't know if that's a nonprofit thing, a Minnesota thing or something, but, people were a little nervous about, ranking themselves as high as they possibly could. So, and that's what I've seen so far, and I suspect I'll continue to see that as people complete it. But looking at that and thinking, there are some questions where I was like, how could you do it any better? And also, again, I think the biggest distinction was sort of this between we are still planning this one, this here. Oh, I don't have my pointer on. That we're still planning this, or this is completed and in regular practice. So there's something about those scales between there where to think about, it's in yes, it's completed or in regular practice, but I'm going to rate myself kind of a little bit lower. So it might be that in the revisions after the pilot, that even just some of the language or some of those instructions on how to interpret scales might have to help us distinguish between those two items. So what happens after the QMAP is submitted? Right now, the advisory committee has discussed it. I have advised that we get feedback from our pilot participants. But there's this question of evidence and our uploads. And what we have heard from participating programs and potential participating programs is that they really want to know that what programs submit is what they're really doing. They want proof. They want to know that everyone is legitimately doing the things that they claim to have in place. These practices are in place because it is this self-assessment, and because you can, you could click anything, but how do we know that those things are really happening? Sort of this question of fairness and how do we protect the integrity of the tool and make sure that that's really working, especially if we do end up with, attaching some sort of score to the QMAP, then that becomes even more important, because if they're going to be compared, if you're going to be compared to another program, you want to know, that if you've spent the time to really read through the scales and rate yourself accordingly, and somebody else has arbitrarily just gone through it, not that we have a huge fear of people abusing the tool, but it's something that programs really want to know about the fairness factor. So currently, in the first, in the pilot and then the first, this version of the QMAP, the online tool, I'm going to go back up to that drop-down menu here a second. We have an uploads section, and I'm going to go there. So it said upload your documents, and what we were asking pilot participants to do was, all right, so upload, in the program management section, we wanted you to upload all of these documents. So just take a moment, and if you want to look at those, and then for the program operations, this whole list of documents that we wanted you to upload, and then evaluation also. Ran into as you can imagine, all kinds of problems with just usability of this process. So, you know, it was the size of file sizes and what our server could potentially hold. You know, logistical things about, you know, like Linda said, I've got all these things, but they're all in different places, and you know, which document, okay, my mission statement, do I need to make a separate document with just my mission statement on it, or my strategic plan includes the mission statement, can I just upload that? Policies and procedures might be in several different documents. You know, whatever it is that you had, this was becoming a problem. There are some proprietary issues where there are some things that programs were unable to share, this wide variety of evidence, and the question from our perspective in the mentoring partnership, like what are we going to do with all of those documents? You know, where do we store them? What do we do? So back to the advisory committee, which is made up of mentoring programs throughout the state, and thinking about what are some alternatives to how we show this evidence and how we check that out. And that's sort of what becomes part of what happens after you submit. So one of the things that what we've been working on is, here we go, is a follow-up, kind of a follow-up checklist, and in an online survey form. And this might just be built into the QMAP someday, or it's just separate, but really just asking you to describe what evidence you have for various program practices. So, and acknowledging that NPM staff will meet with all programs that complete the QMAP, and we'll ask to see these documents, so that you don't have to hand them over, you don't have to email them to us or upload it, but that, you know, in part of that in-person meeting, we might ask to see some of the documents that we ask you to describe, or not even documents. It might be just show us, what do you have to show us that you have this in place. You know, it might be your manual, or you know, maybe the rules are posted on the wall, or something like that, so that we could kind of, so that there's some sort of checks and balances piece, because that was important to programs. It's not at all that the mentoring partnership has any interest in policing the process or anything like that. It's really about helping other programs be comfortable with where we're headed. So it might include here, oh, there's an error processing my request. Well, I might not be able to show you that, it looks like. So I will go back to the PowerPoint. What it includes are just some checklists about, so that list of uploads that we saw on the QMAP, it would just be a checklist. So let's say your program mission statement, yes, we have that, no, we don't, and describe to us what that evidence might look like. And then we can bring that along with us and be able to show that. Furthermore, then what it will also ask for is a little more detail and information about what people are doing in regards to screening, what are their screening practices, and how are people preparing mentors and mentees for matches. So to find out, so if we're looking at quality programs, what does it, because it's a question we get all the time about, so how much screening do I need to do? What types of screening are programs like me doing? But we don't have all that information in one place necessarily. So this will be able to, we'll be able to look at some of that data and say, you know what, programs that are really high quality, these are some of the things that they're doing. Programs like yours, you know, embedded or standalone, or school-based programs, you know, this is the average. This is basically what people are doing in regard to screening. And the same with preparing mentors and mentees. What's the content of that preparation, and what's the format of that preparation? Some programs are doing, you know, pre-match in-person training with a group of mentors. Some are doing one-to-one orientations with mentors, and sort of let's just find out a little bit more about what that looks like. So I've mentioned this in-person meeting, and so I have done kind of one sample of that. We haven't operationalized that or figured out what those will look like, and that's the process that we're at now with the advisory committee, and figuring out, so, you know, what does this look like? And I have review in quotes there because we don't know that we're going to call it a review. It might be might be some other term for it, but really it just means that we're going to meet in person with programs who complete the QMAP and be able to go through, that somebody on the mentoring partnership staff will go through your QMAP, will go through each item, we'll look at how you respond to them, and make some notes. And interestingly enough, with the programs I've done that for, I said, if people underscore themselves, or if I'm really familiar with the program, it helps because I kind of know what practices are in place and can help them. But for a program that I'm really unfamiliar with, it's also a get-to-know-you process where I can sit and find out a little bit more about this program and be able to, make referrals and connections. I like to make connections between different programs much more easily. So it could be, across the board. There's a whole lot of things that we can benefit from that in-person meeting, in addition to having that chance to see the evidence. So what I want to show is that from here is that, so if we were going with the scores, so not that the scores mean a whole lot at this point, but one example from a program that has submitted their QMAP and did an in-person meeting where we went through item by item, you can see how their score, I should have score in quotations too, I'm very cautious about saying that, but how it could change. And that's really my point here. It's not about this is an average score, or this is a good score, or a bad score, or anything at all. So this is just the percentage of items, and based on that 7-point score, that this is how much their score went up after the review. It was sort of, well, yeah, you've got this in place then. Let's talk about this. Why did you rate yourself that way? And then when we really talked about it, and Linda, when you mentioned having your notes about this so that you would remember why you rated yourself that way, I think that was something that we came back to. Or there were places where they sort of underscored themselves, but and that's where they decided, what, strategically, I'm going to choose to keep this at that lower rating because I want to draw attention to this area. There were some things too where it was based upon their mood that day. It was like, oh, I must have been in a mood about how involved we are in our organization's, resource development planning process, kind of that we're being written into grants and we don't have any input into it. Sort of like the mood of the day could affect it. And so having a staff person and somebody from the mentoring partnership to help really, somebody who has access to and is hearing from lots of programs can help interpret those scales and help you get to a point where it's a little more accurate representation of how you, kind of where you're at. But I thought that was something that was surprising to me, and something I would not have anticipated is how you could use the scoring strategically to draw attention to areas that you wanted your leadership to focus on. Thinking about, so after the QMAP, how do you use this information? Great. Other thoughts about that? Anything about the scoring or about what you would like to see happen? I mean, Linda and Becky, what would, I have not done this with your submissions yet, and what would you like to see happen? How would you think you would use the information? I mean, we know a little bit, Linda, that you're planning to use it for some strategic planning already, even
Right.
before having somebody look at it.
Well, yeah, and I just think to work with the partnership and get support, on how to get to the 5s. If I'm a 3 or a 4 or a 1 or a 2. But primarily, I think most of mine they look like 4s overall. But then what do I need to do to get it to 5s? And what can you guys provide to help me get there? What kind of support or resources can you suggest for me to get there?
Right. Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead, Becky.
Well, this is different than the scoring, but I actually would look forward to the site visits with the mentoring partnership because I think it'll really increase the connectivity and the relationship building and help leverage mentoring throughout the state of Minnesota. So I think this is a wonderful opportunity.
Yeah, and that definitely came up about walking through and saying, so how could you get to a 5? Or it really helped identify areas that, you know, in that process, well, yeah, these are areas that then we can work on, or we can do a training on this. And I think when we have a bigger mass of completed QMAPs, and to be able to see, so is there an area where people are consistently scoring themselves low? You know, so then that really reveals to us, well, this is an area that we definitely need to develop more tools, or even just promote tools that we have, and bring people together so that they can feel more confident about this particular area. You know, we probably have some hunches about where those areas would be, but we might be surprised by some of them that will come up. You know, there's one question about in the program management section, and this is for an embedded program, just about risk management, and I've seen several programs listed as not relevant, sort of, but it's also about like not knowing how that fits into their program. Sort of, we think about screening our mentors, but not necessarily risk management for the entire organization and the mission, and how do you protect, protect your mentors and your mentees and your staff, and some of this, how do you protect your funding and your space, and sort of this overall global risk management that not everybody is recognizing as part of their program management process. So, you know, that was one of the things that was surprising to me. Other thoughts from attendees or anybody else about what you would like to see happen, or any thoughts about this? General questions? Okay. Lindsay will keep an eye out for them. Well, we are drawing towards the end. What I wanted to point out to you is we are continuing the Quality in Action webinar series, this monthly series on the first Wednesdays. The next webinar and the next series of webinars will no longer be focused exclusively on the QMAP. We are looking at kind of drawing upon the research in action, which was based upon the 10 10 research briefs that were issued from Mentor, and so change the name to Quality in Action so we can expand the focus of the webinars beyond those 10 research articles. But looking at quality in action and bringing in some more panelists of researchers and other folks to highlight some different areas from the mentoring field. One of the new things in May, starting in May, is that there will be a small fee attached to the webinars. We're trying this out just to help. It's expensive to offer this service, so thinking about our own costs for this and the time that we put in to arrange the panelists and put together the whole production, we're hoping that it has a value for folks, and that just charging a per webinar fee, and there's also a $50 for a 12 webinar pass, so any 12 webinars. Nice to note that it's also per phone or computer connection, so you could have lots of people gathered around one computer participating in the webinars for a pretty nominal fee. But kicking it off in this whole series in May with Renee Spencer and Belle Lang, and looking at the recent article, First Do No Harm, Ethical Principles for Youth Mentoring Relationships. So Renee and Belle, along with Jean Rhodes, have authored this article that's really outlining these 6 principles for youth mentoring relationships, and thinking about the ethical principles and kind of from the medical field of First Do No Harm, and thinking about how does that apply to the field of mentoring. It should be really interesting. I hope lots of people will sign on and participate in that webinar. You can look on our website too, and we're constantly updating, but I think at least the panelists are planned out and through September or October. We'll have, so you can look and see what's coming up to see what the value is for that webinar pass in June. I think that's the only one that's not filled in yet because we were just confirming, but we will be looking at our journey map and thinking about what are some tools and research about how mentoring can help prepare young people for the transition to, for graduation and transition to higher education. So some of the impact on academic performance and In July, we've got the Beacons program and looking at supervision, so the impact of supervision and strong supervision of staff and how that affects mentoring programs. In August, we have Sarah Krummer from Friends for Youth program in California and presenting this screening applicants for effectiveness and looking at some of those pieces. And we have Andrea Taylor lined up in the fall to lead up to her being the keynote presenter at our conference. So she'll be doing a couple different webinars, and we haven't nailed down those topics yet, but we will. And if you have a preference for those, you can let us know. But to bring some research to life with each one of these webinars and to bring in some people from throughout the nation, but also local practitioners, you know, going back to that piece that different kinds of evidence are both important. The practitioner wisdom and knowledge and also the research. So trying to have a balance of that for our Quality in Action series. Any other questions, Lindsay? Are we good?
One final question is if we have the link to the First Do No Harm article that we can pass along.
It is on our website. Yep, it's on the website at the Quality in Action sign-in, but it's also in our resources for mentoring programs if you scroll way to the bottom there. You can also always email me for it, or you can Google for it too. It's available online. It's a great article. All right.
April,
yes.
I have one quick question on the piece you couldn't show at the end about the checklists.
Yes.
Are those aren't online yet?
I was just going to give a sneak peek. We just want to, I want to have people sort of preview it, and then we'll send it out to everybody who's completed the QMAP. It'll go out to everybody. It'll be upon completion of the QMAP, then you can, you'll get this quick survey. It's super quick. It won't, you know, it's not as daunting as the QMAP to go through that. It really is just a clicking things and then short descriptions of a few items.
Okay, so we
should be pretty painless. Yep, just wait and you'll get that in an email.
So we need to wait till that comes out. Okay.
Yep, we'll send you a link to that survey.
Okay.
Yeah. All right, thanks everybody. Hope to see you next month, May 5th, Quality in Action webinar with Renee Spencer and Belle Lang.